The human body is a fragile thing, a collection of bones, sinew, and nerve endings, all perfectly engineered for motion, but terrifyingly susceptible to a single, misjudged step. We trust the ground beneath our feet. We trust the integrity of the spaces where we earn our living. But what happens when that trust is the very weapon used in a calculated act of deception? This isn't just a story about a fall. This is a story about a performance, where the stage was a warehouse aisle, the prop was a freshly mopped floor, and the prize was a lifetime of financial freedom, paid for by the premiums of every honest worker and business owner. Our story begins not with a crash, but with a quiet, meticulous plan. Mark Rinaldi, a 42-year-old forklift operator at a sprawling Midwest distribution center for a major home goods retailer, had been, by all accounts, a reliable employee. For 11 years, he'd navigated the maze of towering shelves, the constant beeping of reversing machinery, the monotonous rhythm of loading and unloading. But beneath that veneer of normalcy, a different plan was taking shape. He had studied the routines, learned the blind spots of the old security cameras, and listened to the whispers in the break room about others who had slipped and were now living comfortably on workers' comp. He wasn't planning an injury. He was choreographing one. The setting was aisle 14, the ceramic tile section. He knew it was scheduled for a deep clean that Tuesday night. He knew the specific cleaner used left a faint, almost invisible sheen, if not buffed dry. He also knew that the one high-resolution CCTV camera covering that aisle had been malfunctioning for weeks, its status listed as pending repair in the maintenance logs. To anyone watching the live feed from the security office, had anyone been watching, the scene would have appeared normal. Mark, in his high-visibility vest, moving a pallet of boxes. But the narrative was about to be hijacked. He took a final, surreptitious glance around. The coast was clear. His body, a moment before moving with the casual strength of a man who'd done this 1,000 times, suddenly transformed. The shift was subtle, a deliberate disengagement from muscle memory. He didn't just trip. He orchestrated his own collapse. His left foot slid forward with unnatural force, as if kicked out from under him by an invisible assailant. His right leg buckled in a way that was biomechanically wrong, a flailing, almost theatrical crumple. His arms, which should have instinctively flown out to break his fall, instead remained pinned close to his body for a split second before he hit the ground with a sickening, full-body thud that echoed in the cavernous space. The sound was a masterpiece of acoustic deception, loud enough to be heard, but hollow in its resonance. He then lay perfectly still, a statue of sudden agony, before letting out a low, guttural moan that was pure, calculated cinema. This single moment, frozen in time, was the catalyst for everything that would follow. It was the lie that would launch 1,000 documents, incident reports, medical forms, insurance claims, legal depositions. It was the seed of a story that would cost his company tens of thousands of dollars in initial claims and lost productivity. But every lie, no matter how perfectly staged, casts a shadow. And in the digital age, that shadow is often longer and more revealing than the liar could ever imagine. If this story of a perfectly staged fall is sending a chill down your spine, if you're already feeling that simmering indignation at the audacity of it all, then you are exactly who we make these videos for. The world of insurance fraud is a dark, twisted rabbit hole, and we're here to shine a light on every corner of it. Subscribe to the channel right now and hit that like button. It's your support that allows us to dive deep into these cases and bring you the full, shocking truth. And you, where are you watching this from? Let us know in the comments down below. Drop your city and what time it is for you right now. It's always fascinating to see our community connected by a shared sense of justice spanning the globe. The moan was the cue. It summoned his coworkers, their faces a mask of genuine concern. It brought the floor supervisor, clipboard in hand, already mentally drafting the incident report. The scene was set. The first act of his play, a resounding success. Mark, the reliable worker, was now Mark, the victim of a negligent workplace. He clutched his lower back, his face contorted in a mask of pain so convincing, it fooled everyone. The ambulance was called, the paperwork initiated, and the expensive, slow-moving machine of workers' compensation was set into motion. Little did Mark know, however, that while he was perfecting his fall in the physical world, a silent digital witness was being awakened elsewhere, one that would remember everything. The initial hours and days after the fall were a masterclass in sustained performance. In the stark antiseptic whiteness of the emergency room, Mark Rinaldi dialed his agony up to 11. Every movement was a carefully measured struggle. A wince as the gurney rolled over a seam in the floor. A sharp, hissed intake of breath when the ER nurse gently palpated his lower back. He spoke in fragmented, pain-laced sentences, describing a violent, twisting slip, and a pop he claimed to have heard in his spine. He was the picture of a broken man, his robust physique seemingly rendered fragile in an instant. The doctors, trained to trust their patients' reported symptoms, noted possible lumbar strain and signs of acute distress, their clinical language becoming the first bricks in the fortress of his fraudulent claim. The following week was a study in domestic theatre. A case manager from the insurance company, a woman named Sarah Jenkins, with a no-nonsense demeanor and a sharp eye for detail, made a scheduled visit to his home. She found Mark not in his bed, but propped awkwardly on the living room couch, a single blanket over his legs despite the warm day. The room was staged, a half-empty glass of water and a bottle of prescription painkillers just out of reach on the coffee table, a remote control fallen to the floor, as if he'd been unable to bend and retrieve it. He moved with a pained slowness that was agonizing to watch, his hand perpetually pressed against the small of his back. He spoke of his frustration, his inability to play with his kids, the simple agony of putting on his own socks. He was convincing. He was sympathetic. He was a ghost of his former self, and Sarah, though professionally skeptical, left the house with a note in her file that read, "Claimant's presentation is consistent with reported injury." But the performance couldn't be flawless 24/7. This is where the first, almost imperceptible cracks began to show. The first red flag was his eagerness. During a follow-up phone call, Sarah asked a routine question about the specific type of flooring in the area where he fell. Most genuine victims have a hazy, trauma-blurred recollection. Mark's answer was instantaneous, precise. "It was the sealed concrete in aisle 14, ma'am. The one they just mopped with that slick industrial cleaner." The detail was too readily available, too crisp. It was a rehearsed line, not a painful memory. The second flag was financial. A standard background check revealed a pattern Mark hadn't accounted for. 3 months before the fall, he had taken out a significant personal loan with steep monthly payments. A week before the incident, he had maxed out 2 of his credit cards on what appeared to be frivolous purchases: a new high-end grill, a large flat-screen television. The financial pressure was a clear, quantifiable motive. It was a storm cloud on the horizon of his claim. The third, and most telling flag, was digital. Sarah, following a hunch, began cross-referencing the dates and times of his reported physical therapy sessions with activity on his social media accounts. While he claimed to be bedridden, or undergoing treatment, his personal gaming profile showed him logged in for hours-long sessions of an intense, competitive first-person shooter game, an activity utterly incompatible with the debilitating back and arm pain he described. It was a small data point, a pixel in a larger picture, but it was a pixel that didn't fit. The narrative of the unshakable pain was beginning to develop hairline fractures. The performance was brilliant, but it was playing to 2 different audiences: the insurance company and the rest of his life. And the 2 were starting to contradict each other. Sarah Jenkins now had a scent, and she was a bloodhound. The initial sympathy had evaporated, replaced by the cold, focused thrill of the hunt. The stage was set for the digital witness to enter the scene and shatter the entire illusion. For Sarah Jenkins, the insurance investigator, the case had transformed from a routine claim into a compelling puzzle. The pieces, the eager specificity, the financial distress, the incongruous gaming sessions, were all there, but they formed a picture of suspicion, not proof. To dismantle Mark Rinaldi's fortress of feigned pain, she needed a battering ram of irrefutable objective evidence. The human witnesses had seen only the performance. She needed a witness that couldn't be swayed by a convincing wince or a tragic story. She needed the unblinking, neutral eye of a camera. Her first step was a deep dive into the security system of the distribution center. The initial report, which Mark had undoubtedly relied on, stated that the primary high-resolution CCTV in ISIL 14 was non-functional. But large-scale warehouses operate on layered security. Sarah spent a full day with the facility's security manager, poring over system schematics and camera logs. It was tedious, eye-straining work. And then she found it. A footnote in the system upgrade log from over a year prior. During a pilot program for a new inventory tracking system, a contractor had installed a secondary high-resolution camera at the far end of aisle 16. Its stated purpose was to monitor high-value inventory, but its field of view, as the schematic clearly showed, captured a long diagonal slice of the adjacent aisle 14. Crucially, this camera was on a completely different network, independent of the main security feed. It wasn't listed on the floor plans accessible to general staff. To most employees, it was invisible. The security manager, initially skeptical, accessed the feed. The data was there. The system automatically stored footage for 90 days before overwriting it. They were well within that window. With a few clicks, he navigated to the date and the precise timestamp of Mark Rinaldi's reported accident. Sarah leaned forward, her breath catching in her throat. This was the moment of truth. The screen showed a static, color image of the two aisles. The quality was crystal clear. And there was Mark. They watched the silent footage. They saw him glance around, his body language not one of a man about to perform a physical task, but of a man checking his surroundings for observers. They saw the premeditated nature of his movements, the way he positioned his body, the deliberate, almost practiced way his legs went out from under him. It wasn't a slip. It was a staged collapse. The sickening thud was now exposed as a piece of audio fiction. The footage was a silent film that screamed one word: fraud. But Sarah knew this was only half the battle. Proving the fall was staged was powerful, but it was a single moment. To truly eviscerate his claim of debilitating injury, she needed to prove his entire life was a lie. She needed to document the double life. She initiated a standard surveillance operation. For 2 weeks, a licensed investigator discreetly documented Mark's activities outside his home. The man who couldn't bend to pick up a remote control was captured on long-lens video, effortlessly loading bags of concrete into his pickup truck. The man who winced in agony during physical therapy sessions was filmed playing a vigorous game of full-court basketball at a local park with friends, laughing, jumping, and pivoting with explosive force. The contrast was staggering. The footage from the warehouse was the knife. This new surveillance was the twist. It painted a portrait of a man not in pain, but in the prime of his health, living a life completely at odds with the helpless invalid he portrayed for the insurance company and the doctors. The final piece of the digital dossier was the most damning. The investigator, noting Mark's regular visits to a local storage unit facility, conducted legal reconnaissance. The facility had CCTV monitoring its exterior corridors and gate. By presenting a subpoena related to the fraud investigation, they obtained the footage. It showed Mark not just visiting, but single-handedly moving heavy, crated furniture out of the unit and into his truck. Side work he was doing for cash, a direct violation of his claimed total disability. Every facet of his deception was now documented, time-stamped, and ready for its courtroom debut. The silent, digital witnesses had spoken. They had captured the truth in high definition, and they were ready to testify. The air in the courtroom was thin and cool, carrying the scent of old wood, lemon-scented polish, and a low electric hum of tension. It was a theater of truth. And on this day, the main attraction was a series of flat-screen monitors. Mark Rinaldi sat at the defendant's table, his shoulders squared in a cheap suit that tried, and failed, to project an aura of wronged innocence. The performative slouch, the constant grimace of pain he had maintained for months, were gone. In their place was a rigid, pale alertness. The carefully constructed fortress of his lie was about to be stormed, and he could feel the walls vibrating with the approaching siege. The plaintiff's attorney, a methodical man with a calm voice that cut through the silence like a scalpel, began his presentation. He led Sarah Jenkins through her testimony, establishing the timeline, the red flags, the financial motive. It was the setup. And then he approached the monitor. "Ms. Jenkins," he said, his voice dropping to a conversational tone that made the entire room lean in. "Can you please tell the court what we are about to see?" "The footage from a secondary CCTV camera in aisle 16, time-stamped 7:14 p.m. on the date in question," Sarah replied, her voice clear and steady. The lights in the courtroom dimmed slightly. On the screen, the familiar silent tableau of the warehouse aisle appeared. The clarity was jarring. You could see the dust motes in the air, the scuff marks on the floor. And there was Mark. The jury, the judge, everyone watched as the pantomime unfolded. They saw the furtive glances, the theatrical setup, the deliberate, almost balletic collapse. The absence of sound made the visual even more powerful. It was a pure, unadulterated view of deceit in action. A juror in the front row, a woman in her 50s, brought a hand to her mouth, her eyes wide. This wasn't a report or a statement. This was the event itself, preserved and presented. Mark's lawyer objected, but the foundation had been laid too well. The footage was admitted. The first foundational pillar of Mark's claim crumbled into dust. But the attorney wasn't finished. The warehouse footage was just the opening act. "Ms. Jenkins, I would now like to present what the investigation uncovered regarding the claimant's activities while he was supposedly totally disabled." What followed was a devastating montage, a split-screen life of staggering duplicity. On one side of the screen, a clip from the physical therapist's deposition described a man who could barely lift a 2-pound weight without crying out. On the other side, surveillance footage showed that same man, days later, heaving a 60-pound bag of concrete mix onto his shoulder with a casual grunt. The most damning juxtaposition was the basketball game. The court saw a medical report detailing severely limited range of motion and excruciating pain upon lateral movement. The screen then cut to the park footage. Mark, in shorts and a t-shirt, driving to the hoop, executing a sharp crossover dribble that would have been impossible with the back injury he claimed, and leaping for a rebound amidst a tangle of bodies, his face a mask of competitive exertion, not pain. A low murmur rippled through the courtroom. The illusion was not just broken, it was being publicly dissected. The final blow was the storage unit footage. The attorney displayed Mark's own sworn deposition, taken months prior, where he had stated under oath, "I can't do anything. I can't work. I can't lift anything. My life is confined to my couch." He then played the silent video of Mark, alone, maneuvering a heavy wooden dresser out of the unit, straining with the very real, healthy effort of the task. The contradiction was so blatant, so insulting to the intelligence of the court, that it sucked the air out of the room. Mark had stopped looking at the screen. He stared down at the grain of the wooden table, his jaw clenched, a single bead of sweat tracing a path down his temple. The courtroom confrontation was over. He hadn't been cross-examined by a lawyer. He had been cross-examined by his own actions, and he had been found to be a perjurer and a fraud in stunning, high-definition detail. All that remained was the judgment. A profound, heavy silence descended upon the courtroom after the last video clip faded to black. The final image of Mark Rinaldi, strong and capable, loading furniture alone, was seared into the minds of everyone present. The theatrics were over. The evidence had spoken its devastating, unequivocal truth. All eyes now turned to the bench, to the man who was the embodiment of the system Mark had sought to cheat. Judge Arthur Whittemore was a man in his late 60s, his face a roadmap of lines etched by decades of weighing lies against truth. He had remained impassive throughout the video presentation, his hands steepled under his chin, his gaze fixed and unreadable. Now he slowly removed his glasses, the gesture feeling as weighty and deliberate as a gavel strike. He began to speak, and his voice was not loud, but it carried a quiet, crushing authority that filled every corner of the room. "Mr. Rinaldi," he started, his eyes locking onto the defendant, who could no longer meet his gaze. "We have all been witness to a remarkable performance today. Not the performance in the warehouse, though that was certainly creative. No, I speak of the performance you have maintained for months. A performance of pain, of helplessness, of a life derailed by misfortune. He paused, letting the words hang in the air. The court has seen the reality. We have seen you play basketball. We have seen you perform manual labor. We have seen in chilling clarity the moment you decided to betray the trust of your employer, your colleagues, and this system. Judge Whittemore's tone shifted from observational to damning. But your crime, Mr. Rinaldi, extends far beyond a simple falsehood. It is a theft that reaches into the pockets of every single business owner who pays for workers' compensation insurance. It drives premiums higher, making it more expensive for companies to hire, to grow, to provide for their truly injured employees. He leaned forward, his voice gaining a sharp, icy edge. It is an insult to every worker who has ever suffered a genuine, life-altering injury on the job. You appropriated their trauma, their struggle, their very real pain, and you turned it into a cheap commodity for your own financial gain. You traded your integrity for a new grill and a flat-screen television, and in doing so, you devalued the entire social contract that protects our workforce. He then began to outline the sentence, each word a brick being laid in the wall of Mark's consequence. The court finds you guilty of workers' compensation, fraud, and perjury. You are hereby sentenced to 24 months in a state correctional facility, the maximum term allowed under the sentencing guidelines for this offense. A gasp, quickly stifled, came from somewhere in the room. Mark flinched as if struck. Furthermore, the judge continued, his voice relentless, you are ordered to pay full restitution to the insurance company in the amount of $87,450, covering all fraudulent claims paid out and the cost of this investigation. Any and all disability benefits are hereby terminated, permanently. A permanent record of this felony conviction will be attached to your name, a fact you will disclose on every job application, for every loan, for the rest of your life. Judge Whittemore placed his glasses back on, his final words delivered with the weight of a tombstone sealing shut. This sentence is not merely about punishment, Mr. Rinaldi. It is about sending a message. A message that the courts will not tolerate this calculated predation. That there is no mercy for those who so brazenly mock the concept of justice. The system you tried to cheat has now judged you, and it has shown you none of the mercy you so patently do not deserve. The gavel fell. The sound was a period at the end of the story, a single, sharp note of finality. For Mark Rinaldi, the performance was over. The curtain had fallen, and the only role left for him was that of a convict. The slam of the judge's gavel didn't just mark the end of the trial, it was the sound of a life shattering. Mark Rinaldi was no longer an actor on a stage of his own making. The high-visibility vest was replaced by prison orange. The spacious, if modest, home was exchanged for a 6-by-8-foot cell. The freedom to stage a basketball game with friends was gone, replaced by the rigid, unyielding schedule of incarceration. But the most profound prison was the one he had built for himself long before the sentencing, a prison of his own deceit. Every night, in the crushing silence of his cell, the footage would play on a loop in his mind. Not the CCTV footage the court saw, but the memory of his own choices, the deliberate slide, the fake moan, the lies told to his concerned children about why Daddy couldn't play anymore. The material possessions he'd acquired were gone, repossessed, or sold for the restitution order, but the shame was a permanent fixture. He had sought a life of leisure funded by fraud. He received a life of regimented hardship defined by his crime. The twist, the final, cruel irony of his situation, came months into his sentence. So the genuine accident occurred at the distribution center. A forklift driver, a man Mark had trained, suffered a real, catastrophic spinal injury when a load shifted and pinned him. The company, its insurance premiums already inflated by cases like Mark's, faced another massive claim. The community, which had followed Mark's trial in the local news, now saw the stark, gut-wrenching difference between a choreographed fall and a true workplace tragedy. Mark, in his cell, heard about it during a monitored phone call with his now ex-wife. The news was a psychological gut punch. He had devalued the very system designed to catch and protect people in their most vulnerable moments. And now, someone who truly needed it was navigating a system made more cynical and financially strained by his own actions. His fraud had not been a victimless crime. Its ripple effects had, in some small, immeasurable way, contributed to a climate of suspicion that every genuine claimant now had to face. Judge Whittemore's words echoed with a new, profound clarity. There is no mercy for those who mock justice. The justice had been swift and severe, yes, but it was also deeply resonant. It served as a stark reminder that for every person scheming to game the system, there are dedicated investigators like Sarah Jenkins, armed with logic and technology, and pillars of integrity like Judge Whittemore, who stand as guardians of fairness. The verdict was a balm for the public's sense of indignation, a reassurance that the scales, though sometimes slow to tip, can still find their balance. Mark Rinaldi wanted a story of easy wealth. Instead, he became a cautionary tale, a name whispered in training seminars, and a statistic in the fight against insurance fraud. His desire for a life without labor had earned him a sentence of the hardest labor of all, the endless, unproductive labor of regret. This case is closed, but the conversation is far from over. Does this outcome feel like true justice to you? Or do you see shades of gray we haven't considered? How do you think we, as a society, can better protect the system from those who would exploit the trust we place in one another? Share your thoughts below. The most compelling perspectives are what fuel our next deep dive into the dark world of true crime and fraud.